In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains how people go from a place of order to chaos in no time.
The idea, well, you've got this little framework that you have to look at the world through. It tells you approximately where you are, approximately where you need to go, and approximately what you should do to get there. But it can be wrong at any level of analysis. So then you ask, well, what produces those little worlds? And one answer is basic biological necessity, right? So the basic motivational systems, emotional systems, the lines are blurry, partly keep you on track, right? You're hungry when your blood sugar falls, you're thirsty when you're not sufficiently hydrated, obviously. You're sleepy when you've gone without sleep for too long, etc., etc. And those things have been problems for so long that in some sense you have machinery that takes care of that. Okay, so that's modeled there. I sort of roughly broke the fundamental motivations into those that keep you going and those that help you propagate, because in some sense those are the two Darwinian problems that you have to solve in life. But then you might think, this seems to me to be how you can start to think about how the traits might be organized into this narrative scheme. It's like the traits seem to me, maybe there's 100, maybe there's 30 motivational states. Some of them are pure motivational states maybe, and some of them are just combinations of motivational states. But they're like the basic elements of motivation. And then maybe they clump together in 5 different ways. And out of that we get the 5 traits. And then the 5 traits are like, they're kind of like the preconditions for your particular story. So if you're a conscientious person, then the world is a little less orderly and a little less well put together than it should be. And your story is, I'm the person who goes in there and fixes that up and makes it orderly. And you know, if you're an extroverted person, then you think, well, there's all that social territory out there to occupy and exploit, and I'm the sort of person that is really going to do that, because that's where your interests lie. And if you're an open person, it's like, wow, look at all these weird things that I can do and think about, and so that's the world for you. And those are all, you can think of those as a set of 5 stories in some sense that have a reasonable probability of success. So there are 5 modes of being, and they're composed of these more fragmented fundamental motivations. It's something like that. It's so that's sort of where you can start to see the concordance between the narrative theories of the clinicians and the trait theories of the empiricists. And there has been work done on this sort of thing. So we know, for example, that Jacob Hirsch did some of this work, that your trait temperament does influence the words that you use to describe your spontaneous self-narratives. So if I say, write about your past, and then I analyze your word use, I can make an educated guess about whether you're extroverted or introverted or conscientious or open or agreeable. So, and then Dan McAdams has showed that, you know how the big 5 clump into plasticity and stability? The plastic people produce more exploratory narratives, and the stable people produce narratives that are more associated with, security and order. So there hasn't been a lot of work done at the interface between traits and narratives, but, so I'm sort of pushing the limits of knowledge here, but I think that's the direction in which the integration will likely take place. Okay, and then we talked a little bit about how emotion might work too, and so we say, well, you're in this little motivated state, so it tells you something about where you are and what that's like, and it gives you some hints about where you might go with that. And it disinhibits the relevant behaviors that would be associated with that, including perceptual behaviors. And then you walk forward, and well, what happens? Well, 2 things roughly can happen. Things you want, which indicate A, that you're moving towards the goal, and B, that your plan is good, right? It indicates both. And that's positive emotion, right? That's incentive reward. That's dopaminergically mediated, and you like that, as long as it's not too intense. And then the next thing that can happen is 2 things. It can be divided into 2. There are things you don't want to have happen. And some of those are, well, there's just an obstacle in your way, and with a minor deviation in terms of trajectory, you can walk around it. And then the other is, something you completely don't understand happens, and it just knocks the bottom out of your stupid plan. And then it also might knock the bottom out of all sorts of other plans as well, depending on how unexpected it is. And that seems to me to be where the transition from order to chaos occurs. So we use a relationship example again. You go home to invite your girlfriend out to have dinner and you find out that she's in bed with someone else. It's like, well, dinner's off. Right, okay. But that's not all that's off, right? So then you might think, okay, well, there's a lot of things all of a sudden that are off, because that's a much bigger catastrophe than if she says, well, I already made dinner, and, you know, maybe you're a little irritated because you can't take her out now and you have to eat something else. It's like, oh, well, that's not such a catastrophe. But it's not easy to figure out exactly why those catastrophes differ, because they're both unexpected things. And so then you have to think, well, one of them seems to disrupt a lot more than the other. And then you have to think, well, disrupt what? And then that's why I talk to you guys about this. Because and this is Piagetian in some sense. I think this is the way to understand why you get upset when you get upset. It's like, okay, well, you know, you wanted to take your girlfriend out for dinner, and you know how to do that. You go into the elevator, you take the elevator down, you eat, you pay, you know, it's behaviorally plotted out quite well. And so there's a bunch of behaviors at the bottom, and then there's the, you know, the label, go out for dinner, and it's a little thing down at the bottom, and it gets disrupted, and so you're sort of upset in proportion to that little bit of territory that's been bent astray. And maybe if you're not too emotionally unstable or neurotic, maybe it's a pretty seamless transition, you know. Whereas if you're, say, emotionally stable and extroverted, you think, oh, good, something new, you know. So, and both of those responses are understandable. All right, but when it's, you know, your partner's in bed with someone else, it's sort of more like at the top, which is, well, your conception of the quality of your life, or the overall quality of you even. And when something major happens, it's like it blows apart, potentially blows apart your entire structure. Partly your conceptual structure, because like, what the hell did you know? Like, how stupid could you possibly be? And that tells you exactly how stupid you could be. But then you start to wonder about why it happened to you. And partly that's because you're stupid, or at least that's what you think. But then it's also because, well, maybe there's a whole bunch of skills that you don't have. Like, you know, if you were a better person, if you were more interesting, if you went, you know, more places, if you were more caring, if you weren't quite as selfish, if you were more conscientious, right? Because then you start to think, well, what do I lack? It's not only what have I misperceived, it's what do I lack? And when you get hit at a high level, like your partner betrays you, it's like you're infinitely stupid and you're infinitely worthless. And that's chaos. And so then you're in chaos, and well, what then do you do? Well, the best answer to that is you avoid it to begin with. You take the steps along the way that decrease the probability that you're ever going to end up there. And that's, in some sense, that's what that means.